Welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast number 734. I'm Tom Cagley, your host. While preparing for this week's podcast, I ran across a recording of a presentation I did at IDEAfest 2020. The topic was the 7 macro trends driving software development behavior. The presentation was crafted at just the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, but the topics are still relevant. Perhaps even more relevant than they were in March 2020. So to make a long story short, I re-edited the recording and decided to share the talk for those who weren't at IDEAfest 2020 or have blanked the last couple of years from their memory. I'll also post the presentation in the feed for your pleasure and to spark conversation. We're going to talk about 7 macro trends today. And to be honest with you, Jeff and Jim this morning hit a number of topics that I want to talk about today. It was funny. Last night I edited and posted a revised version of my paper on the beginner's mind. And so it was really funny to hear Jim talk about the beginner's mind this morning. It's like, maybe there was this mental bridge. But even though some of the items that I'm going to point out as macro trends based on what I've seen in the podcast are similar, I think that there'll be some nuances there, right? The world of software development is full of ideas. And matter of fact, there are probably more ideas and concepts that are floating around, theories, than there are actual practitioners. And there's certainly more ideas and theories than there is data. Now, my friends that I hang around with in the measurement world, they're all trying to fix that. But in reality, we can talk to a lot of people and put together all sorts of these things, but pull out some central threads. And so a combination of time, reoccurrence, and synthesis are tools to find those common threads. The platform that I'm harvesting from for this is the Software Process and Measurement Cast. And, here's the ad, right? Software Process and Measurement Cast is a podcast. It covers topics that deal with the challenge of how work is done in information technology organizations as they grow and evolve. I really like to point out that it is full of ideas, it's full of options, it's full of opinions, and sometimes it might even have an occasional fact. The first one went up in January of 2007. And the first guest was a very dear friend of mine who is Will McKnight, who was a CMMI assessor. We recorded this in 2 hotel rooms in Sherbrooke, Quebec. And it was a really great thing. Will is dead now, and he's not the only person that I've interviewed that has later turned up dead. It has nothing to do with the podcast. 596th episode went up last weekend, and as I was telling Michael and Jeff when we were talking the other day, I have roughly a terabyte worth of interviews in the can right now. And that may sound like a lot, but if you store things in WAV files, they're pretty darn big. So the reality is, right, I have all of this wonderful information, a lot of people touching it and enjoying it. The podcast has been a learning platform. It is a learning path, not only for my listeners, and I get people that tell me that they've learned a lot from it, but it's been there for myself, right? So there's some non-altruistic part of this. It's a platform to talk about change. Change is really an important topic. And we've hit a little bit about this across the morning. And I've always been struck by W.B. Yeats' poem, The Second Coming. And The Second Coming is really about World War I. And when I first started in on thinking about pulling together the information on this, I really was contemplating what's the next big thing over the next few years. And while I agree with Jim that we shouldn't focus on what the new normal is, because who the heck knows what normal really means, there will be changes. And those of us that are helping organizations be something else have to start anticipating and thinking about those things. May not create courses. You may not be rushing to put 18,000 webinars on how to do a meeting from home, but we have to start considering these things because things fall apart. The center cannot hold. To quote Yeats, a mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. If we think back at the beginning of January 2007, this is what the iPhone looked like. And you're saying, but Tom, there's no picture. You're right, because there wasn't an iPhone in January 2007. The first iPhone was delivered in June 2007. And I still remember that day because I was at a party and somebody walked in with it, and that person sure got a lot of attention, almost to the exclusion of everyone else there. We're, well down the path now where everyone carries around a more computing power in their pocket than most of us knew existed, right before the turn of the century. If you want to think about a few things that have changed over the years that aren't Apple related, I was talking to Allison Dalton, who's a formidable Salesforce consultant, and she has pointed out that in 2007, mailrooms were a thing. Now I know there are mailrooms, but they were a big thing, and there were lots of people in them. Cubes were the name of the game in most organizations. Maybe we'll be going back to cubes so we can keep, a 2-meter distance. But now we've gone back to open office concepts, which might not work in the new world order. Many applications use monolithic release strategies. I remember being a release manager and really focusing on trying to do quarter releases and, wrestling all that stuff back together so that in essence, we could have these big monolithics. Now, it is fundamentally different. Change will not stop. And I'm also one of those people who actually does use Agile in a manufacturing scenario and makes it work. So can be done kind of stuff. This is a journey of self-discovery, putting this together, and discovery in its own right. So I have these two word clouds. And the first, I took the titles of the first 100 shows, and that was 2007, 2008, 2009. It was a little less regular then. And then the last 100 shows, and ignored everything else in between. I think all of us are really looking for a way to defeat cognitive entrenchment. And that's really what I think we want to face and wrestle with as leaders, practitioners, and people involved in change. Now, cognitive entrenchment, that's, big words. That's not the stuff that you find when you dig a trench in your yard. It's the fact that it's very hard to be creative in a field that you have a long time been in it. And those whole, you bond, you have all sorts of anchoring biases going on. We have all seen experts fight tooth and nail to defend the point of view. We talked earlier about, and there were a couple of comments about, wasn't it terrible when people were saying you couldn't do the CMMI in Agile, or the CMM in Agile, or anything else in Agile. Well, those, again, that's not people trying to truly be evil. What they are doing is they're fighting for their level of expertise. They're defending where they've spent a lot of time and effort to be important in cognitive entrenchment. Over the last 13 and a half, we can see a change of focus. So if we look at the word cloud on the left, traceability was a big issue that at least the people that were coming to me and talking on my podcast were pointing out. Requirements, estimation, metrics, all of those things, huge. Matter of fact, you see the CMM